I took the job because my cousin Marco needed someone he could trust, and because my daughter needed me to be able to pay her bills. There's no ceremony to say it. You get the keys, the radio, the seat warmed from the officer before you. I had Sarah's name in my head the first night I stepped into Unit 7 and slid the laminated protocol card into the left breast pocket of my jacket where I could feel it against my chest. It was small. It was rigid. It was full of rules. The desert has rules. We don't break them. Station 3 sits low against the scrub. Chinley district covers 67 miles that fold and flatten and fold again like an old map left in the sun. Our patrol circuit runs those 67 miles on repeat, mile markers at 19, 33, 41, 47, 53, and back to 67 before you reset and go again. We call it the loop. You learn the loop by feel. The dip in the road before marker 33, the wall of basalt that throws your headlights into shadow at 41, the long straight into 47 where you watch your speed and your mirrors. Unit 7 carried a standard inventory, spare tire, tow strap, first aid, a toolbox with duct tape and cable ties, a pair of flares we never used but kept because you keep flares. The radio was old, it's static, honest. The laminated card in my breast pocket listed protocols by number 235911. It told me where to check in, when to check speed, what to do if there was a pedestrian in the road. It read in plain language, the sort of language that leaves you no room to improvise. For example, one of the standing orders, Protocol 3, put a line underneath everything else. Do not respond to knocking. Do not open the door until sunrise or until dispatch arrives with verbal confirmation code, whichever comes first. Those words were printed like a commandment. They mattered. I remember the first call from Marco because it woke me at 2 hours a.m. He didn't sleep much either. You there? He said. I said yes. He told me there was a vacancy on nights at Station 3. He told me the pay was enough to cover a month of Sarah's meds if I could hold the shift. He said it fast, like he was telling me how to load a stretcher. I said I'd take it. I told Sarah the job was overnight, that I'd be home in the mornings, that the money would come. She believed me. I kept telling myself that was why I was out there when the wind took the brim off my hat and the dash clock clicked 1903. We ran the loop like a metronome. Start time was precise. Radio call-outs were precise. Dispatch, this is Unit 7 beginning patrol loop 1 at 7:21 p.m. Route clear, I said on my first night because you say your calls even if no one's listening. You log everything. Time, mileage, condition. Officer Nez wrote my initial orientation into the logbook and circled the numbers I'd be repeating for weeks. 40 on the straightaways, 25 when town signs drop, 15 for any residential approach. He told me, we don't make assumptions about movement. We follow the rules. Loop 1 was mostly desert and small things. Animals move at night. Coyotes answer each other in shrill calls, and sometimes a deer will stand in the road and freeze so still the world believes it's a road marker. Those became my baseline observations. Whoever reads the log will see 1938, stationary deer, cleared by passing, and think it's routine. That's the point of the log. It flattens the odd into the ordinary until odd starts to stack on odd. On that first week, the Hogan Foundation at mile marker 41 was just another structure on the map. It sits back from the road. You can see a foundation and a low roof before you make it to the marker. The first time I slowed down and swept the beam of the spotlight over its perimeter, it was empty. Lights were off. The wind moved a scrap of tarp where a night breeze caught it, and the place seemed uninhabited. I wrote it down. 4102, Hogan Foundation clear. My handwriting was neat. I wanted it to be legible should anyone check. Night 2 stayed ordinary until the break between loops. I had coffee, a sandwich, and the radio hot in my lap. Someone knocked at the station door around 03:10. Not on the window, not a call on the radio, but a knock, 3 hits, then 2. Old habit tells you to open the door if someone's pounding. Protocol says otherwise. I felt my fingers twitch toward the latch, and the laminated card in my left pocket felt hotter against my chest than the coffee cup. Protocol 3. Do not respond to knocking. Do not open the door until sunrise or until dispatch arrives with verbal confirmation code, whichever comes first. I logged the knock as required. I keyed the mic and said, "Dispatch Unit 7 at Station 3, report knock at station door at 0310. The reply came back in that flat voice I'd learned to read for concern. Unit 7, acknowledge. Make no contact. Stand by for Supervisor Chen. 2 officers came down from the barracks to watch the door. They had their flashlights, and the lamplight hit their faces, in the way lamplight always does. It looks smaller than you expect. We stayed put until dawn. We opened the door at exactly 06:02 after dispatch gave the verbal confirmation code. The person on the other side was gone. Nothing was taken. No one could explain the knocking. We recorded it. Protocol works like that. You stick to it and you collect facts. By the end of week 1, those facts started to form a shape. Things appeared at the same clocks, at the same markers. A pair of headlights would stay on the horizon and match your speed as if afraid to overtake. A pedestrian would stand 2 feet from the guardrail, like a mannequin left out to see the stars. Once, at mile marker 33, I found the white painted stone moved an arm's length from where it had been a week earlier. A painted stone in the desert is not supposed to move. Amendments came in like rain you didn't expect. First droplets, then the ground slicks. Marco slid me the first yellow card in a paper envelope when he stopped by on my 3rd shift. It was labeled Amendment 1 in block letters. The amendments arrived off the regional desk with stamped dates and supervisor initials. They weren't stories. They were orders. Amendment 1 adjusted our stopping rules. Where once we might have made a courtesy stop for a stranded vehicle, the words now read that any vehicle left with hazards flashing required report and distance approach protocols rather than direct engagement. We had to log VINs, time, location, and stay no closer than 50 meters until a supervisor advised. Amendment 2 was the one that tightened my stomach. It arrived 2 nights later, taped to the inside of the locker. It was short, concise. It referenced mile markers. Readers of the card would see the range 3344, and instructed that if an obstacle was present on the roadway, you were to stop at the nearest safe distance, reverse no less than 100 meters, call dispatch, and not exit the vehicle under any circumstances until verbal clearance. Reverse. Back away to a place where you could see the obstacle, but not interact with it. That sizing up I'd learned as a child applies to roads as much as to relationships. Do not step forward into unknown. Protocol 5 clarified an observation we'd been making. Figures wearing uniforms, reflective vests, or anything resembling emergency clothing were not to be approached. Visual identification only. If the subject presented credentials through a window, pass them to dispatch's photographic line. If they spoke your name from the darkness, log the call and report it, but do not respond. A name called from the dark is a target in some tasks. Our instructions were to treat it as such. Those first amendments felt like a change in season. The desert didn't stop being the desert. The sky didn't rearrange itself. What changed was our distance from what might be wrong. We pulled back. We logged more. We spoke to each other less. Loop 2 changed the way I watched mile marker 41. On a clear night, the foundation there reduces distant headlights to single pinpricks. You can see silhouettes form and unform across that low ridge. The first night I noticed a light inside the Hogan. It was small and steady like a lantern. I reported it as a point of interest. Amendment 4, issued the next morning, told us to record the intensity and duration of such lights and to maintain a moving observation rather than stopping. No approach, it said. Document only. That sentence became a rule that made my hands stay on the wheel. I've had people ask why we don't just stop and help. It's the simplest question. Why not stop? Why not pull over, shine a torch, call a name back? The answer is the laminated card in my pocket. We weigh a life against a guideline, the way you measure fuel against distance. In the field, you cannot let empathy ruin your ability to document. One person's rescue can become 4 people's disappearance if the patterns aren't respected. We ran loops, and each loop taught us a little more about not interfering. At 1912 of a certain night, I cleared a man walking on the south shoulder with a duffel bag. He didn't move when my passing headlights washed over him. He watched me as if he'd been there since the afternoon. I logged him as stationary pedestrian, observed eastbound, no movement. 2 hours later, he wasn't there. We found footprints that stopped at the guardrail, nothing else. By the end of week 2, the number of anomalies had risen enough that regional command raised the level of concern. We got a radio bulletin that included language I had not expected to hear in my morning pre-shift debriefs. We have observed repeated recurring anomalies across districts. Field staff must adhere to existing protocols and all new amendments without deviation. Report unusual counts immediately. Those words came from Supervisor Chen. They were not an offer. They were a command. On the night, an old sedan sat in the pullout at 53, flashing hazards on, with no driver in sight and no heat rising from the engine. We followed the amendment to the letter. I radioed in, logged VIN, recorded estimated distances, and pulled back to 50 meters. My partner that week, Sosie, read the amendment aloud into her pad as if a prayer. We watched the sedan's blinkers cut the darkness in calm, mechanical intervals. At 02:44 a.m., a headlight pulsed in the distance and matched our speed for nearly a mile. The sedan's hazard light kept time with our tachometer. At 03:05, we were ordered to maintain distance and await a tow from regional. 10 minutes later, the sedan was gone. There is a way the desert removes things. It takes them quietly and leaves evidence that makes you suspicious of your own memory. That's why the log is sacred. You write it down. The time, the numbers, the conditions. You describe only what you saw. You do not explain. You do not guess. The laminated card insists you are a recorder first, an interpreter second. Amendment 6 arrived stamped with a regional seal and the initials of 2 supervisors. It required that any report of voices calling names be routed through Emergency Protocol 1 if the occurrence exceeded 2 separate reports within a 12-hour window. Emergency Protocol 1 was the sort of document that rearranges schedules. It meant supervisors would log a regional conference call, units might be reassigned, and daylight checks would increase. It was the first time I heard the phrase that would make nights after it feel heavier: consolidation of incidents. There was resistance in pockets. Every agency has officers who think rules are for other people, not for themselves. There had been a story, hushed among a few older deputies, of an officer who stopped to check a vehicle and never came back. I learned that story in fragments. I learned it as an implicit warning. That's why the amendments were so draconian in tone, not because we took pleasure in them, but because the pattern demanded it. A detail worth notating: on my 4th week, the painted white stone at marker 33 no longer sat tucked against the berm. It sat in the middle of the lane, heavy and absurd, like a punctuation point in an otherwise straight sentence. I came around the bend at 33 doing 40 and slammed the brakes because I thought a deer had crashed the highway. The stone was smooth white with a single black line across its face. I hit amber, holstered the radio, and called dispatch. Unit 733, approaching obstruction on roadway, white painted stone middle lane, request guidance. I didn't get out. I didn't walk to it. I pulled back 100 meters because of Amendment 2. I reversed the vehicle to a position that gave me a view but not contact. I maintained headlights for observation, and I logged my bearings. That was the first time I felt the laminated card as a physical restraint rather than merely an instruction. It's important to be precise about this because the difference between respecting a rule and inventing it is a matter of life. I could have opened my door and picked up that rock. I could have taken it into the bed of Unit 7 as a trophy or as proof to anyone who doubted me. I didn't. I signed my name to the radio log and typed the VIN, the location, the time. A tow was dispatched. Tow never arrived. At 04:20 the rock was gone. We started to count. A pattern will reveal itself when you catalogue the small things. Lights in Hogan. 1 night, then 3 nights, then 5. The first weeks there was always a single figure in the high shadows near 41. After that, figures clustered in small numbers. They lined the ridge like watchers. We tried to correlate their numbers with the amendment issuance. They kept growing. By the end of loop 3 on that cycle, I received another envelope from Marco. He had stopped by again to check on me the way a cousin does, with a half question and a cigarette butt between his fingers. He'd noticed I was quieter, my eyes narrower in the morning light. The envelope had Amendment 8 inside. Field staff, the header read, must limit approach to visual resolution only. Any figure count greater than 3 requires immediate regional reporting and suspension of patrol at night in the affected area pending supervisory authorization. That was the first formal document that spoke the word suspension aloud inside our packet. Suspension is a serious thing. Suspension interrupts lives and shifts duty. The nights tightened. We started sleeping in shifts of 2 hours on, 2 off, where before we had driven and rotated naturally. The district held a meeting where Supervisor Chen spoke to the hall. He was a man of few words, but you could feel the effect of an order when he said it. Numbers, he said into the microphone, will determine our posture. We follow the numbers, we follow the logs, we follow the card. He said it as if saying otherwise would be blasphemy. That's when I realized the laminated card does more than save you in the field. It becomes a record that can protect others from what you cannot explain. There are moments when instinct pulls hard in the opposite direction. Once a voice called my name from the dark. It was a soft call around 01:33, a syllable, a name put through wind. My fingers itched to open the door. My heart told me a father would go to a voice his child called. The laminated card was in my left pocket, and the rules were in my head. Amendment 6, Emergency Protocol 1. I keyed the mic and reported. Dispatch, Unit 7 at Station 3, received voice call at 01:33. No visual. Request guidance. I waited, and the headquarters answered with the language of caution. We stayed inside. The voice faded. Those tiny choices pile up. You begin to see the logic behind the restraint. The rules are not cold. They are not cruel. They are preservation. They keep you alive to sign another day's log. They let your daughter have her medicine. They are pragmatic insistences, human devices for dealing with things you cannot explain. I started to cross-reference. At mile 41, the Hogan Foundation, the nights with the highest light counts also reported multiple vehicle anomalies between markers 47 and 53. Headlights that matched speed, pedestrians that kept distance, rocks that moved. The pattern was not a single place, it was a vector. Regional command pulled in neighboring districts for a coordination call. I listened while Supervisor Chen enumerated our reports, and the desk started to talk in numbers. Counts per night, amendment compliance rates, radio latency. They asked for copies of our logs. They asked for eyewitness statements. They told us to freeze our routes and not to deviate from assigned mileage without authorization. Amendment 9 read like an insistence on uniformity. All patrols maintain prescribed loop speeds and check-in cadence. No unilateral changes. We were training ourselves out of curiosity. You notice that after a while. The first impulse is always to go closer, to touch, to verify. The second impulse is to write it down and wait for the answer. Fieldwork teaches you to prefer the second. It gives you a record that can be corrected later. It keeps you accountable. There were officers who didn't make it long. They left campuses or transferred back to daytime tasks and said little. There were others who stayed because they had to stay. Mortgages, kids, and the small kind of pride that comes with not folding in the face of bureaucratic orders. My own refusal to quit had nothing to do with courage. It had to do with Sarah. I sat in Unit 7 on a cold night and counted my route in the dark, thinking about her pharmacy bills and the way she'd smile if I told her I could buy her another month of medicine. The laminated card is pragmatic in part because the practical need presses on you. You're not an abstraction, you're a father, you're a neighbor. You have obligations. Loop 4 on a particular week is where things stretched. We were 3 nights into a run, where the Hogan showed 3 separate lights on the south porch and a cluster of figures that measured 5 at their highest. I reported the count. Amendment 10, a terse note with a stamp that read Regional Command, came the next morning. Any figure count greater than 5 required a consolidated incident report and immediate escalation to the district supervisor for possible temporary suspension of overnight patrols in the affected sectors. That line sat on our inbox like a challenge. It's worth saying again, these documents are not intended to make the unusual go away. They're intended to keep officers able to document the unusual. They keep you alive long enough and organized enough for others to look at the data and decide next steps. We follow them because they have reasons we can feel but not explain. The desert enforces its own logic. Our procedures are how we live inside that logic. I trained myself to read the sound of the radio. A certain tone of static at night meant the line was long. A clipped transmission from dispatch meant the desk was watching. Once, in the middle of a quiet loop, Largo from the North Precinct called in. Unit 7, this is Largo. You seeing anything at 41? He had the same breathless attention I remembered from my first weeks. I responded with the standard call. Unit 7 at 41. Lights observed on South Porch, figure count 3. Documenting. That exchange was plain and short. It was also the language of survival. Names, times, locations, counts. There's a small archive in my head now of those counts and calls. They live next to my daughter's prescriptions and my cousin's voice. Somewhere between mile marker 33 and the Hogan at 41, the laminated card felt less like rules and more like truth. Truth in policing is not a metaphysical thing. It's a ledger. You put down what you saw, and you protect it from contamination by wishful thinking. We learned to wait. We learned to record. We learned to back away when the painted stone lay in the lane. We learned to treat a name called from the dark as a variable and not a cue. The amendments layered over the base protocols until the whole package felt like armor. My left breast pocket kept the card, and the warmth of my hand would rest over it when the nights were noisy. It reminded me that I was a father and a deputy, and not either alone. The rules were the center line between those two responsibilities. If you want to hear how the rules keep you alive out here, keep watching. That night the Hogan showed a new pattern. We had seen a single light, then 3. Now there were 9. At first it read like a bad tally. Wrong assumptions, miscounts, backs of heads stacked in shadow. I drove the route twice that loop, once at the prescribed 40 and again at the reduced 25 where the approach demanded. Each pass I counted and logged, 5 at 41, then 7, then 9. My breath was leveled by the radio, and I reported each change with the flatness the desk expected. My hands were steady because the laminated card told me exactly what to do and what not to do. We weren't the only ones noticing. Sosie called in from the opposite approach and Nez did an observation run from the south. Supervisor Chen convened a telcon. Voices over the line listed counts, times, and the precise language of amendments and protocols. At Euro 158, the log showed a cluster of updates from across districts. Lights, matching headlights, moved stone, and a surge in figure counts near the Hogan Foundation. The desk said, "We will escalate to Emergency Protocol 1 if reports continue to rise." It sounded like a thin, precise knife cutting through the night. Escalate to Emergency Protocol 1 meant more than paperwork. It meant regional coordination, shared resources, and a readiness posture none of us had practiced in the field. The night thickened. The trucks were heavier on the road. We waited in our vehicles as instructed. I sat with my hands on the wheel and the laminated card nudging my ribs. The headlights from other patrols traced the horizon like slow metronomes. The desert had not altered its face. We had. We were doing more not to touch than to touch. We were wearing the absence of contact like protective clothing. Then, near 0320, the painted stone returned to the center of the lane at 33. We had to reverse. We followed Amendment 2 exactly. I backed Unit 7 100 meters and held the beam steady. The radio asked for a confirmation of position. I gave it. The desk told us to hold and keep a log. I watched the headlights from the far horizon correspond to our speed and maintain their distance. I felt the old hunger to step out and move the rock like someone setting a domino back in place. The laminated card prevented me. When the night folded into dawn and the phone stopped buzzing, we had pages of logs that read like a ledger of caution. We had numbers that insisted on attention. We had a stack of amendment cards that were heavier in my pocket now, as if full of small coins. Marco smoked his cigarette the way he always did, and told me nothing more than what he always told me. You doing what you should. That's a cousin's way of praise. We signed forms that morning. We handed over our copies of the logs. We emailed images to regional. Somewhere in the clerical machinery, a desk typed up a recommendation to hold a consolidated episode review. The word suspension floated in the memos we received. We filed our names, we stayed on our assigned patrols, and we attempted to sleep. The balance held for now. The desert kept its distance and we kept ours. But when the figures at 41 counted 9 and the painted stone could be found in the middle of the lane and then vanish, there was a sense in the station that a new season had begun. The laminated card in my pocket was no longer just a guide. It had become a map of what to do when the map failed. A week later there would be another summons. There would be a regional call where maps and amendments collide and decisions would be made that suspend certain hours of patrol. For now, for the rest of this night, I drove the loop again and again, logging, observing and holding the card in my left breast pocket as if it were a small, warm body. The desert has rules. We don't break them. The morning after the logs went in, the station smelled like burnt coffee and paper. Supervisor Chen called a briefing at 08 UAO, and the hall filled with uniforms the way tide fills a harbor, slow, inevitable. He stood at the front with a printout of the consolidated incident sheet and the regional seal at the top. He read the numbers aloud in a voice that didn't try to convince anyone it was casual. We have 9 reports of increased figure counts at 41 across 3 districts, he said. Multiple verified vehicle anomalies between 47 and 53. Repeated obstruction occurrences at 33. Amendments 1 through 10 have been distributed and received. We are moving to Condition Black, effective 18 tonight. Overnight patrols in affected sectors will be suspended until further notice. Daylight checks will be scheduled. Emergency Protocol 1 is active for consolidated incident reviews. There was a pause long enough for someone to cough. Condition Black. The phrase hung in the air like a caution light. It meant the desk centralized authority. It meant no unilateral decisions in the field. It meant an end, for now, to the small independence that makes night patrols feel like a private trade. It also meant fewer hours on the road, fewer chances to earn overtime. For a lot of us, those were plain facts that hit the wallet and the home life with the same bluntness. Marco put a hand on my shoulder as I filed out. "You okay?" he asked. He always asked that with the economy of a man who had his share of trouble and finished it quickly. "I am," I said. It was a true sentence and also not the whole story. Sarah's pharmacy called and left a message that morning. I listened to it twice in the break room before I told Marco. "I can make the hours they need," I said, meaning what I could do when the desk let me. Suspension made me nervous in a practical way. It reduced the steady nights that had been turning into paychecks. But it also felt like protection. The laminated card in my pocket was warmer that morning, and I felt ridiculous for being comforted by a piece of plastic with typed rules. Condition Black began at 1800 that evening. The phone chain tightened. We moved to daytime check schedules, and Regional Command rerouted some of our assignments so no one unit would be alone in an affected sector during low light hours. Tow companies were put on standby with specific approach parameters. The amendment language that used to be printed on small yellow cards was now reissued as a sitrep in an attached file on every desk computer. The desk repeated the lines again. Do not respond to knocking. Do not open the door until sunrise or until dispatch arrives with verbal confirmation code, whichever comes first. If obstruction on roadway, stop at nearest safe distance and reverse no less than 100 meters. If figure count greater than 3, report immediately for potential suspension. Those lines became a script we repeated like a pledge. For 2 weeks the nights were quieter. That was not because the desert was different. It was because we were. Our presence was coded into gridlocks of policy, and the landscape respected the pattern as it respects honest tires on honest gravel. People called us grateful or resentful, depending on their closeness to immediate need. The desk ran the numbers and presented trends that looked clinical on screen. Compliance rates, calls per hour, response latency. The Consolidated Incident Review met with outside agencies. We filled out forms, and Human Resources checked people's availabilities for reassignment. It was paperwork that smelled like survival. Then, when the desk judged it could, Regional Command allowed a phased resumption. Overnight patrols restarted on a limited scale in sectors cleared for return. The resumption came with a packet of new protocols, refinements rather than replacements. Protocol 11 was added to the list of standing orders. Any visual confirmation of uniformed personnel requiring assistance must be relayed through the photographic line before any engagement. Protocol 2 was reprinted with extra emphasis on check-in cadence. Amendment 10 remained a hard stop. More than 5 figures, and the night was suspended again in that sector. Because I had kept my logs meticulous, because my radio transcripts and timestamps were clean and consistent, Supervisor Chen asked me to stay on the overnight roster as a permanent assignment when the rotation restarted. It was not a promotion in the way a badge change feels, but it was a signal of trust. You follow the card, Chen said. We need people who follow it so that we can analyze the data. Marco grinned like he'd been betting on that outcome, and then quietly slapped me on the back. Good, he said. You doing what you should, and Sarah. He gave me the look of a man who knows how months can pile up. She'll be good. The next cycle brought a different kind of pressure. We were not back to the old loop, but we were testing the new protocol architecture. Each pass we made adhered to the new guardrails. Maintain 40-25-15 speeds, call in at the prescribed markers, log everything, and never deviate without a supervisor's authorization. We ran with a recovery unit on standby and a supervisor sometimes shadowing in a separate vehicle. If any anomaly required a field action beyond the packet, we escalated it immediately. One night Saltwater called it in from his approach to 41. Unit 7, this is Saltwater, observed multiple figures on the east ridge. Count squared at 4. Lights present on the south porch. Maintaining distance, recon advised. His voice was flat, the way we all learned to be when the words were serious. I responded with the language of the log. Unit 7 at 41, lights observed. Figure count consistent with Saltwater. Documenting, requesting supervisor standby. Chen answered the call and ordered a consolidated observation, bringing in Largo and Dea for cross-verification. We did not get out. We did not circle the ridge. We kept our distance and let the cameras and the coordinated vantage points gather the best possible view from allocated safe positions. Dea had been a field officer longer than I'd known her. She had a pragmatic way of moving through protocol that felt like a template. She set up a long-range camera from a ridge that was outside the no-approach zone and fed images to dispatch. Benali coordinated the tow allocation they kept on standby. The images recorded small, ambiguous movements, something turning, then standing. The figures were indistinct at that distance. The camera picked up no faces, only the idea of bodies. The log was dense that night. Times, headings, distances, lens settings. When Regional compiled the footage into the consolidated review, those images were filed alongside our written accounts. The visuals were limited. They were evidence of presence, but not of cause. They fit the pattern, and they added weight to the record. A week later, there was an incident that made every officer in the hall sit straighter at roll call. In another district, a deputy chose to engage a stopped vehicle with hazards, flashing contrary to Amendment 1. That deputy's last transmission was a standard call. Then, the line went dead. The desk reopened the incident and placed a hold on the case while teams were dispatched to search daylight routes. I will not pretend I had more details than the desk released. We were told the deputy was accounted for later. I was told the investigation was ongoing. That ambiguity is part of what the laminated card protects you from. Not the mystery itself, but the rashness of a good-hearted impulse that could complicate others' safety. We kept doing the job. Nights when the figures were few felt almost ordinary again. Nights when the Hogan showed a scatter of lights still rolled in suspensions and escalations. Amendment after amendment taught us not just what to do, but how to be the kinds of people who could follow those instructions without letting anger or shame or a desire for answers break the pattern. The training that followed was not about bravery. It was about discipline. A turning point for me came in a conference room 3 months after Condition Black began. Regional Command had scheduled a consolidated incident review with neighboring jurisdictions and a panel of analysts borrowed from state lines. I was asked to present our district's logs, Unit 7's logs, the radio transcripts, the timestamps, the photographs Dea had taken, and the list of amendments that had been implemented. I stood at the front with my notes and the laminated card in my pocket and read the nights in order. I spoke of the Hogan at 41, of the painted stone at 33, of headlights that tracked our speed between 47 and 53. I read out the amendments one by one. Amendment 1, Amendment 2, Amendment 4, Amendment 6, Amendment 8, Amendment 10. I explained the function of Emergency Protocol 1 and how it tied repeated voice calls to Consolidated Incident Review. I described the exit strategy in Amendment 2, the requirement to reverse no less than 100 meters from an obstruction. When I finished, the analysts asked pragmatic questions about latency, about observer overlap, about camera angles. You learn quickly in those rooms that your value as a witness is not in how frightened you were. It's in your handwriting, your timestamps, the orderliness of your reports. Chen told me afterward that my submission had helped convince Regional Command to fund a small training packet that would be mailed to every district. You write it up, he said. You'll be part of the team that teaches it. For a while, the idea felt like a quiet joke. Me, teaching. But the truth is, after nights of following the card until it became muscle memory, I had something to offer that was more useful than speculation. I had a ledger. The training packet I helped draft was deliberately utilitarian. It began with the laminated card's core protocols and layered in the amendments as scenarios rather than philosophy. We printed out scripts for radio phrasing and a checklist for how to document visual anomalies and vehicle anomalies. We included a short section on health and welfare, how to manage fatigue and the human pressures that push officers toward risky choices. We were careful not to moralize. The document's tone was a clinical one. Here is what happens, here is how to record it, here is how to stay intact. When the training classes started, I found a way to make the material live. I would stand in front of a room of recruits and say, I have a daughter named Sarah. She takes medication. The paycheck I make for overnight patrols matters. So these rules are not abstractions to me. They are my way to get home. That line used to feel like a confession. Slowly, it became a bridge. People owned their reasons in that room. Children, loans, pride, fear. We did scenario work. We practiced radio calls. We practiced the reverse maneuver at 33 in empty parking lots with cones representing painted stones. We simulated a vocal call at 0133 and trained recruits to log it and await dispatch's verbal confirmation before taking any further action. The trainees asked hard questions. Why can't we help? They asked. Why can't we walk up to somebody wearing a vest who says they're from highway patrol? I always answered with the same combination of fact and honesty. I read aloud Protocol 5 when asked. Figures wearing uniforms, reflective vests, or anything resembling emergency clothing are not to be approached. Visual identification only. If the subject presents credentials through a window, pass them to dispatch's photographic line. I explained the logic. If the pattern uses identity as a lure, verification through uncontaminated channels reduces hazard. I told them that following the rule does not make you less of a helper. It makes you a more reliable one. The trainees would nod and write. They wanted the reasons and the evidence, and they could see them in the log samples I brought. After a few months of formal teaching, Supervisor Chen recommended me for a training coordinator position. It was an official promotion with paper and a change in payroll code, and it came with the task of formalizing curriculum and acting as a primary point for consolidated training across the district. I accepted. It felt like the most natural step of all, taking field habits and turning them into language for others. The promotion also relieved some of the financial pressure. I could stagger my hours to make sure Sarah's medicine remained affordable without staying up all night in a cruiser. There were nights I missed being on Unit 7, the smell of the leather seat, the radio static, the small ritual of checking mile markers at 47 and 53, those things became memory. Training had its own rhythm. Classroom, paperwork, phone calls with regional about curriculum updates, the occasional field demo. I wrote appendixes about documentation and included examples of clean logs beside messy ones, pointing out how a clean log made analysis possible. I insisted that every trainee keep their own laminated card and practice the wording for radio calls until it sounded like bedtime prayers. Occasionally the field called me back. Supervisor Chen would ask for an experienced hand to be on site during a phased resumption, or Saltwater would ask for a coordinator to stand by during a concentrated observation. I would go, not as the night patrolman, but as the teacher and the witness. On those nights, I watched officers who had been students make the right calls. I watched Sosi set up a camera and Benali feed images into dispatch and think quietly that the system was working in the way we had intended. There was one event some months later that crystallized the whole arc for me. It was late December. The nights had a brittle edge to them that belonged to coming cold. We had resumed overnight patrols in a rotated manner, and Unit 7 had been assigned one of the shifts. I had been asked to observe and support. We ran the loop slow and careful. At 33, the painted stone had been reported again, right of lane. The officer on call stopped at the nearest safe distance, reversed 100 meters as Amendment 2 required, and set up a visual range behind the berm. We were joined at a distance by a tow that had been given staging coordinates. That tow was under clear instructions. Maintain distance, photograph from a static position, do not approach the obstruction without a supervisor's clearance. While we observed from a safe perimeter, the stone moved. Not by a trace or a rumor, there was a clear sequence on the camera. The stone slid from the center of the lane toward the right shoulder, crossed the gravel, and then appeared, inexplicably, to have vanished from where the cameras could see it. The tow operator reported back that when they later drove the lane at daylight, the stone was not in the road and no disturbance to the shoulder could be found. We recorded the occurrence and filed it. We did what the laminated card asked. We documented, we alerted, we did not invent. A week after that, Regional Command issued an after-action report thanking the district for adherence to protocol and referencing the resumption criteria that had been satisfied by clean documentation, coordinated towing, and supervised observation. The language was careful, but the effect was clear. Following the card made collective analysis possible. We had, at least for the moment, transformed the pattern into data we could look at. There are trade-offs in a job like this. One of them is a kind of lonely competence. You learn to replace the immediate moral clarity of "go help" with a different kind of moral clarity, one built on the knowledge that your presence is a piece of a larger process. You accept that you may not have an answer to the why. You accept that your role is to ensure the who, when, and where are captured so inference can happen without contamination. On a personal level, the steady role in training and the more reliable pay after promotion let me handle much of Sarah's bills. The day I handed her a check that covered 3 months of medication, she cried in a quiet way that made me grieve and feel proud at once. She worried about me in ways she never said aloud, but the times she did ring home to check in, the line would go from a soft question to the steady, dry humor we had between us. "Dad," she said once, after I'd explained the new job, "don't forget to come to my kids' recital." It's the smallest of human things, recitals and prescriptions, and it made the whole, huge collection of nights worth it, in a way the logbooks could never show. There were moments when others pushed the rules. People forget under pressure. Someone would report fatigue. Someone would have a family emergency and be tempted to improvise. That's when the training part of my job felt its weight. I would say plainly, protocols exist because somebody in the past did not follow them and things got worse. If you cannot trust the process in a moment of heat, we fail together, and we would talk about the practicalities, about how to get a supervisor out, how to route photographic verification, how to keep a patient from deteriorating while maintaining the perimeter until authority arrived. You learn how to be helpful without being hazardous. Time calmed the sharp edges of the first weeks, but it never eliminated the uncertainty. Even now, years into the role, the Hogan at 41 is a marker that stirs a small tightening in my chest. The painted stone at 33 is a phrase that can make me check the pockets for the laminated card. My left breast pocket still remembers the card the way a palm remembers a tool. I still keep the spare in my locker. There are nights when I teach recruits and tell them what my cousin Marco said when he checked on me. He said, "You doing what you should." He said it with the abridged grammar of a man who has seen enough to know what matters. Marco's praise was exact, because it had little to do with praise and much to do with appraisal. It is the sort of assessment you can hold privately and let it move you. The desert has its own rules. They are not written in the official amendments, but they run through them. Distance matters, observation matters, repetition matters. You follow the card because you don't know every reason yet. You follow it because following allows you to live to ask questions another day. You follow it because not following throws a wrinkle into the ledger that could cost someone else later. One night after a long training session, I drove Unit 7 around the loop because teaching leaves residue, the want to check things yourself. The Hogan had the faintest glow that looked like lantern light in a window, but when I ran the official pass at 25, it was only a reflection off an old tin roof. I logged it as such and left the rest to the consolidated registry. Back at the station, I pulled the card from my pocket and read Protocol 3 aloud to myself one more time, not because I needed reminding, but because rituals help fold the day's edges. "Do not respond to knocking," I said. "Do not open the door until sunrise or until dispatch arrives with verbal confirmation code. Whichever comes first." The words were not supernatural. They were functional. They were a limit that meant someone would come around with an answer, whether that answer was practical, bureaucratic, or simply another question. Years of documentation have shifted into training and into quiet archive. The logs we built are now part of a regional repository. Analysts sometimes reach out when counts spike or when a neighboring district sees a pattern that seems familiarly vectorial. We share, we consult. Protocols continue to be amended as new data appears. There is humility in that process. The card is not immutable. It changes the way a living system changes. Slight trims, a new clause, a rearranged order to match what the field teaches the desk. When recruits ask me whether I believe in what we observed, I answer the way the desk taught me to. I say what I know. I know that lights appeared in the Hogan. I know that the stone moved into the lane. I know that figures lined the ridge. I know that following the card kept people alive and made our accounts useful for analysis. I do not claim to know the cause. That is not my role. My role is to collect the who, what, when, and where, so others may study the how and the why. I have kept the laminated card over the years. Sometimes new officers laugh at the size of it, so small and so full of edge. Sometimes older officers touch it and smile like someone remembering an old friend. It remains in the left breast pocket of the coat I wear in winter and the vest I lean against in the station. It is warm from my hand as if it carries a pulse. There is a humility to that warmth. The laminated card is not a substitute for courage. It is an instrument of prudence. It is a set of boundaries that helps a person navigate an environment that refuses explanation. We do what the card tells us because the desert, like any shared environment, has rules that are not optional. We learned them the hard way. We teach them to others. We live by them. When people ask me if the nights changed me, I tell them they did. The job taught me reserve. It taught me the value of process. It taught me how to weigh impulse against consequence and to trust the ledger over my first instinct when the ledger has proven right more often than not. It taught me the small arithmetic of duty. A recorded observation now may save 3 people later. The desert demanded that we codify our responses because the unknowns did not respect improvisation. There are moments of satisfaction that arrive quietly. The day Sarah's medication was fully covered for the year, she brought a thermos of coffee to the station and sat for 10 minutes while I explained how to fill out a consolidated incident report. She listened and then said with a small laugh that I couldn't tell if it was nerves or pride, "So this is why you talk like that?" I told her yes. She rolled her eyes and then hugged me. It was another small ledger entry. Time, place, feeling. It had nothing to do with the amendments and everything to do with why they mattered. Looking back, the sequence of amendments reads like a skeleton that we clothed with discipline. Amendment 1 changed courtesy stops. Amendment 2 insisted on a reverse distance. Amendment 4 told us to record light intensity. Amendment 6 established thresholds tying repeated voice calls to emergency protocol 1. Amendment 8 put caps on counts before automatic reporting. Amendment 10 forbade patrols in sectors with more than 5 observed figures. Emergency Protocol 1 allowed for consolidation and region-wide coordination. Condition Black centralized authority when the numbers required suspension. Each piece slotted into place to protect the person doing the patrol and the person who might need help later. They were practical answers to a pattern we had not expected when we first took the route. There will be nights when the Hogan looks like a house with its lights on and nothing else to report. There will be nights when the painted stone is found where it had been before, and we will brief it as an anomaly with little further consequence. There will be nights when our logs are thick and the desk convenes another telcon. That is the nature of the work. We live with rhythms and counters, with measures of how often something happens and how we respond. I still keep the card in my left breast pocket. When I teach, I hold it up and show the wording for Protocol 3. I tell the recruits the story about the knock at Aero 310 on my second week because it's concrete and because it smells like coffee and fear, and the beginning of the thing that would change many nights. I tell them the painted stone story because it is tactile and strange, and because it taught me the value of a reverse maneuver. I tell them about the 9 counted at 41 to show how numbers change posture. I tell them about the times when a toe arrived on time, because that is the best kind of validation we get, a coordinated response that did not end in harm. If there is a moral in all of this, it is not piety. It is procedural. Follow the card. Keep the log. Report the time, the distance, the vehicle identification numbers, the counts. You might save yourself. You might save the next person. You might give analysts enough to see the pattern that was invisible before. People sometimes expect me to end these accounts with a revelation. I have none that fits that form. What I have is a steady accumulation of small truths. The desert is not an enemy or a friend. It is a context. It has limits, and we built limits of our own, protocols, that let us operate inside it. The card does not answer why things moved or why lights appeared where no one lived, but it does give us a way to act that preserves our ability to ask the question again tomorrow. I am a Navajo officer. I learned to measure miles and nights in ways that belong to this place. The desert has rules. We don't break them. We follow them because they are our method to live and to keep others alive. We write things down. We coordinate. We teach. We revise. We respect boundaries we don't fully understand because that respect buys us time to let the record accumulate until someone in a position to analyze it can draw conclusions we cannot. If you want more first-hand patrol accounts and training excerpts like this, subscribe and follow for the next deep dive. The card stays warm in my pocket. The loop is long. The rules remain. We do not break them.